Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. This is a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I am a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist. I'm in private practice. I see tons of ADHDers. At this stage of my career, I'm mostly doing evaluations, but I have in the past done therapy, family, individual, pretty much the whole shooting match. I also am the parent of a child that is now an adult with ADHD. And I say this every week, but it's important. When I was the parent, I was the young parent of a young child. There was a whole bunch we didn't know about ADHD. There was a whole bunch that was unproven in most people's mind. We had a lot of folks running around thinking that there was no such thing as ADHD. It was just an excuse for poor parenting, or, I don't know, mom ate too many Snickers bars during the pregnancy, or some other kind of explanation that didn't really make a lot of scientific sense. But I was in graduate school for clinical psychology. It was an APA, American Psychological Association approved program, and I went through the whole program without once hearing ADHD mentioned. No coursework, nothing. Okay? That's kind of the state of knowledge back in those days. And even when we decided, my wife and I that is, that we had to find out something about our young man, because he was doing stuff we just didn't expect from one of our kids. And I had a couple of friends, acquaintances in the psychology world who had done postdocs in pediatric psychology. So they spent their whole practice was working with kids, and they couldn't help. So I did what you got to do. Fortunately, being a psychologist, I know how to learn about psychology. That's probably the biggest thing they teach you. So I went to a lot of conferences, I read a lot of books, all kinds of stuff. Too bad the internet wasn't as well developed as it is now, because it would have been a lot easier. But I basically became a de facto expert in ADHD. And, in my area, I am, the one people refer to when they're not sure, or they've got a complicated case or something like that they think ADHD might be involved. I work darn hard to get into that position. And sometimes I wonder why, because some of the stuff I get is a little bit interesting. But I am officially and without shame, an expert on ADHD. And, there's still a huge amount of traffic in ADHD evaluations, which I assume makes perfect sense when you think about where people who are Americans originated. We were all mutts and mongrels from Europe, basically, or other parts of the world as well. And so with that kind of background, probably a lot of these folks who are looking for adventure in the new world had ADHD. So it's not surprising that we have a pretty high percentage in this country of ADHD. What I'd like to talk about today a little bit is, people have parents. If you're parents of ADHDers, or if you have ADHD yourself, there's a lot of concern about, is it possible to be successful with ADHD? Is it possible to survive with ADHD? Is it possible to get through college? Is it possible to have a successful business? All these things. And the rough answer is, heck yeah, you can do whatever you really want to do. But that's part of the problem. I keep mentioning that ADHD, it's not that they can't pay attention, it's that they just don't have very good control over what they pay attention to. Okay? An ADHDer has what Dodson calls an interest-based attention system. If they're interested in it, they can pay attention like crazy. Matter of fact, most of them are also capable of what's called hyper-focusing. That is really getting into something that they enjoy and just being lost in it for hours and hours. And if that happens to be the way they make a living, that subject matter is the way they make a living, it's beautiful. It works out perfectly. If it's not, then you're in trouble. But the deal we're talking about with ADHD is, I ran across an article, it was quite a while ago, but it was about a school, a specialized school, I think it was in Los Angeles, Fielding, I think was the name of it, and they, basically they're a specialized school for kids with ADHD and or learning disabilities. So they got the idea that, they'd been in business for like 50 years or something. Let's survey our alumni and find out what characterizes the ones who are successful from the ones who are perhaps not so successful. And the first thing I want to emphasize is that one of the findings they got was the severity of the ADHD was not one of the deciding factors. No. That's a biggie, I believe. Okay? Maybe you don't know, but ADHD can be normally distributed in the sense that you can have a little bit of it or you can have a whole bunch of it. Okay? And that wasn't one of the things that determined whether somebody was successful or not. Okay? So, if you're an ADHDer out there saying, I can't succeed because I've got ADHD, life is so tough, and so on. It's not how bad the ADHD is. Okay? I'm going to go over the characteristics, okay, of the successful person with ADHD. Okay? For parents, that's what you're trying to train your kid to. For if you're already an adult with ADHD, you're an entrepreneur, whatever, these are the things you need to focus on and check if you're doing the necessary in those areas. Okay, the first one is, and this is tricky, acceptance of the diagnosis. Okay, and the parents have a tremendous amount to do with this. Okay? You need to be able to accept that you have ADHD and it's just one of those things. Like being short or being tall or whatever. It's a thing you have to learn to live with. You have to deal with it. It's not a curse, and it's not an unmixed blessing. Okay, it's just it just is. And so if you can't be one of those who falls apart every time you lose focus on something, or that kind of thing. You have to accept. Okay, I have ADHD. There are certain things that are going to be harder for me than for other people. There are certain things maybe that are going to be easier for me. I just have to accept that. And I'm still a good person, and I'm still have as good a chance as anybody of succeeding in the world. You have to be able to believe that. And parents, you need to start reinforcing that kind of thinking at a very young age. I talk about the Lesotho rule fairly regularly. It says that people are most efficient and creative if they are getting 4 positive remarks for every 1 critical mark. And that's especially true for parents. If you can't find 4 things to say to your kid for every critical one, you're they're going to have problems. Okay, you can train a negative self-image into a child. Your job, and I don't mean to get all, oh God, no, because you have to set limits. That's part of the job as well. But there are ways and there are ways. Okay, so one of the things, acceptance, is real important, and that comes from, as much from the parents being able to accept it, sort of, no big deal, as teaching the child to do that. And then the other part of that is being able to recognize situations where the ADHD is likely to cause you problems. We're going to have a board meeting today. It's going to be an hour and a half of boring talk. And I'm never good at that. Well, look at that. What is it you need to get out of that kind of a meeting? That's the bottom line. You may have to do it a different way than everybody else does, but that's the bottom line. You may want to get, they make digital recorders now that speed up conversations, compression. It takes all the ahs and oops and dead space out, and so your 40-minute meeting is down to 20. That may be a good thing to do, and there are all kinds of ways of handling. You may take the worst notes in the world, but you have a friend who takes really great notes. You may, you do him a solid, he does you a solid. Hey, can I get your notes? Will do this for you if you can give me your notes. They're all, like I say, there are all kinds of ways. Some of them involve technology, and some of them involve just old-fashioned horse trading, as my grandfather used to say. That you have to work with your strengths versus somebody else's strengths, and work out an arrangement. And most ADHDers are pretty good at that kind of thing. Okay, after acceptance and recognition, compensatory strategies, and that's really what we've been talking about. If you're in a situation where you know your ADHD is a handicap, what can you do to compensate? Now, if you're a kid, there are fewer options, okay? You may have a buddy who's, like I said, takes good notes, and maybe you can work out a trade. You'll teach him how to throw a curveball if he takes notes for you. But you have to have compensatory strategies, okay? ADHDers have lousy time sense. That is, time gets away from them. 10 minutes feels like 10 hours. You need to use a timer. That's a compensatory strategy. Most of the time, the recommendation is set it, if you're dependent on what you're doing, but if it's a work environment or even if it's homework environment, set it for like 45 minutes or so. When the alarm goes off, you get a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break, or maybe 15, to make it come out on the hour. And then you set the timer again. That's a compensatory strategy for poor sense of time passage. And most of them are not magic kinds of things. They're pretty practical and pretty ordinary. And some of them, especially when you get up so you're running a business and stuff, is hiring somebody to do the stuff that you really are bad at. Okay, when you're a kid, you don't have that option. But when you're an adult, say you're an ADHDer and you run a company. Well, I know when you started out, when it was a small company, you probably did almost everything. But the minute you start making a profit, start making more money, you need to, both for the sake of your business and for the sake of your own mental health, get out of the things that you're lousy at and that you hate doing. hire somebody to do those things. Usually with ADHDers who are entrepreneurs, they hire people who keep them on task, keep them organized, do the accounting. Although some ADHDers really love numbers and playing around with numbers, but that is not my problem. I do not like accounting, and I don't care who knows about it. But if you're running a business, you need to have a tight hand on the money, okay? Because that's how most small businessmen get into trouble, as they don't pay attention to that stuff. They give it to somebody who may or may not be honest, to take care of it. And all I'm saying is that it is important to delegate the things you don't like to do, but it's also important that you supervise that you look at those. Just because you don't like, say, like me, you don't like doing accounting, don't like the numbers, that doesn't mean you're out and don't ever have to look at the books. No, you still have to, make sure that things are looking about right. But you're not doing the day-to-day stuff, the boring day-to-day kinds of things. I like a lot of us who are entrepreneurs like to think of ourselves as the content creators. We're the creative ones. We do the fun stuff of developing courses and programs and that sort of thing. And somebody else can do the business part of things. That's why there are virtual assistants in the world that help put internet stuff together, and that's why you hire people like that, because that's not what you're good at, and it's frustrating to you, and it still needs to be done, and on time. And if you're always putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, your business suffers, and that's not a good thing. Okay, and the next thing that a successful ADHDer has awareness of and has actually some formal training in that is emotional regulation. Okay, ADHDers. If you've got a young ADHDer, their emotions are some sight to behold. Sometimes they can have total screaming fits that last a long time. Okay, gradually as the parent, you have to teach them that that's not a good way to do things, that there's a cost to doing all that. People don't like you, people don't want to play with you, people don't want you into their classroom, all kinds of stuff. But there are techniques out there that help with emotional regulation. The fancy ones are like our cognitive behavioral techniques, which is just a fancy way of getting a hold of what you're thinking about that's causing the emotion, and then changing it to a more calm kind of thought pattern. You change your thoughts, basically. Other things can be as simple as, every time I'm starting to get angry, I take 10 deep diaphragmatic breaths, or I drop to the floor and do 10 push-ups, or I go for a 5-minute walk. Whatever. Something that helps you handle it. A lot of times for ADHDers, just getting physically active helps with the emotional control in a tremendous way. And, it's good for you. So emotional regulation is one of the big things. And as parents, if you're the parent of an ADHDer, you need to get some training and probably some therapy, or at least have family therapy sessions where somebody who's trained teaches, say, cognitive behavioral techniques. It's not magic, and it takes a lot of effort, especially at first, but it's important for you to be able to teach that to your child, or monitor his or her progress in developing those skills. Okay? The next area, and this is this is a tricky one, I think. Successful ADHDers have a support network. That is, people who are behind them, who are giving them the support they need to keep going. Because ADHD is sometimes not a whole lot of fun, and it gets you into trouble sometimes. But you need to know that there are some people who will back you all the time. If you're an ADHD parent, that falls on you. Okay? That's your job, is to support your child and help them develop all the other things we've been talking about, the skills, the strategies, the self-acceptance, that kind of stuff. But they won't do that without some support. Everybody needs support. Even the most introverted of all introverts needs support. And that's where, originally the parents come in, and later on in life, maybe the parents are not so much in the picture, and maybe it's more family, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, or just friends. You need good friends who can be supportive and will tell you the truth. Even sometimes if you'd rather not hear it. But it's important to have those relationships. All people are social. All people need supportive relationships. It's good for everything, including making your brain last longer. So those are the biggies, okay? And frankly, I was trying to remember this article and I couldn't find my copies of it. So this is the best thing I can come up with, pulling it out of my memory banks. It's pretty complete. I think there might be one other one, but I don't recall it. So another thing, I saw something, I think it was today, on one of the social media anyway, which reminds me, I have been talking about how the ADHD brain is different from a neurotypical brain in the sense that it tends to deplete dopamine. Okay, the net effect, for some reason, dopamine metabolizes that faster for an ADHDer than it does for a neurotypical. Okay, that means they're going to have less dopamine on board. That's why they do some of the crazy things they do, or that's why you do some of the crazy things you do, is because excitement, intense exercise, the hang gliding, or jumping off of buildings and parachuting to the ground, or riding your bike down the side of a mountain that shouldn't ever be ridden down. That excitement increases the dopamine in the synapses in your brain, and that makes you feel normal, makes you feel good. It also is why you have more brain injuries and more fractured bones and all that other stuff too. But and that's also why the untreated ADHDers have more trouble with substance abuse. So you need to remember that, and I know I've mentioned it before, but it was usually some kind of in passing. So it's a major thing. Okay. And one of the simplest ways to increase that dopamine is physical exercise. It doesn't have to be hairy, scary stuff. Just physical exercise will eventually increase dopamine levels. So, okay, that's me for this week. I am Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, and we're the show that's trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. Because remember, compliant conventional thinkers don't change a thing in the world. It's outside the box thinkers that change society, that change the world. And if you have an ADHD child, or you are an ADHDer yourself, you were born thinking outside the box. So one of you might be the one that's going to solve some of the world's big problems. So it's important to the rest of us to encourage you, because we need that. We need that ability to see outside the norm. So, make comments somewhere down below or off to the side. I can't remember which. Mention anything you'd like me to spend some time discussing. Also, if you'd like this page, that would be helpful. It gets the page to you more frequently from Facebook, and it's helpful to me. And the other thing is, my website is terrygingrassphd.com, and pretty soon we're going to have some new stuff for you, and just stay tuned, okay? If you want to go to the site and give me your email, we can make sure you're on the list to be notified when new stuff starts. I'm not at liberty to say right now what it is, but it is done in the spirit of trying to be helpful to this particular population. Okay, catch you next time.